Hey folks, my name's Kevin and it's time for a little bit more knife nerdery, and today we're going to be unboxing two different versions of the newest knife from Eric Ochs, the Solarstorm EDX. If you don't know who Eric Ochs is, he's a custom knife maker. He's been in the game for well over a decade. Fun fact for me is that he is an Oregonian, just like me, and in fact, I think he lives about 15 minutes away from me, which is just, that's fun, hometown pride. Anyway, the EDX line is, I believe, his first foray into production knives, and the name EDX itself is a playoff of EDC, of course, everyday carry, because these are everyday carry knives, but the X there is for crossover, because he views these ultra high-end production knives being made by Reate as basically the kind of transition crossover point between standard production and true custom knives when it comes to quality and attention to detail and materials and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, I think that's a very fair way of looking at it. To open this up, we're going to be using the first item in that EDX lineup of his. This is the Osprey EDX. I have a hard time saying the name of this knife out loud because I'm pretty confident it is Ochs and not Ox. There are people who spell their name the exact same way and do pronounce it Ox, but the thing is Ochs Osprey is hard for my brain to do as a tongue twister. It wants to say Ox Osprey or Ochs Osprey. Anyway, this is a knife that was sent to me by my friend Stefan. It's part of a larger box, big old box unboxing that I did of like 5-6 different knives. They'll probably be up in the channel before this. I don't really know. The truth is, I just don't really love this knife. There's things about it that I'll probably talk a little bit more in this review, but I did talk about in that unboxing as well, that they just aren't quite me, and stylistically it isn't quite me. And so I'm hoping that I end up liking this one a whole lot more, in part because one of these is mine. The other one actually belongs to my friend Stefan. He sent me that whole big box of knives to play with while he was abroad in Europe part of the way of the summer, and so one of these is the version that I am proxying for him, and I'm going to send back with all of those. Anyway, let's get in here and get checking these out. Numero uno and number two. Now the reality is I have absolutely no idea which is which. There's no difference in the way that the outsides are labeled, so let's just open them up at the same time. Okay, at the bottom of these boxes is this like quite large terry cloth. Is it branded in any kind of way? It does not appear to be branded in any kind of way, but this is a very nice terry cloth. So this is, a lot of people include some kind of cloth to rub down your knife, and it's usually a very thin nylon thing. This is like a plush microfiber wholesale, there you go, a plush cloth that actually be very, very good for rubbing stuff down. But it does not appear to be branded in any kind of way. I'm just going to stick it back at the bottom of the box. I'm going to leave the other one in, set those on the floor. Okay, do these in and of itself tell us which one's which? Yes. So this one up here is going to be fat carbon in copper camo. Copper camo. For some reason, tongue twister brain today. And this one is going to be black twill carbon fiber. So this one is Stefan's and this one is mine. What else does this say about it? Titanium Framelock, hardware is stainless titanium clip and spacer, milled bolster texture. Basically all of this stuff is things that we will see as we get in it. One thing to point out is that these are both marked limited run of 322. And what I don't know is if that's the total number of Solarstorm EDXs, period, or if that is the number they did of each different colorway. But let's take them apart. Okay, so this over here also came in this same kind of pouch. This is a really cool pouch. This is much nicer than the pouches you'll find in a lot of knives, something like This is the same kind of pouch you'll find, not exactly the same, but this is like the American Blade Works pouch. And also, who else sends stuff in these pouches? Honestly, it reminds me of the pouches that Trevor Berger uses. Yeah, anyway, I really like the inside of this. It's just very cool. I wonder if these are exactly the same pouch. Probably. Yeah, I really, really do like these pouches. It's a nice touch. So they are wrapped up inside. Okay, loving the way that looks already. Let's get this one open too. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna put that off to the side for now. Yeah, these are gorgeous. Okay. Oh, I love how these turned out. So I'm not personally much of a twill carbon fiber person unless it is 3D contoured. I find that the twill carbon fiber, like the 2x2 twill, it's just a monotonous texture. My brain loves swirly textures and things that look like burlwood and stuff like that, but it doesn't like really, really fine-grained monotonous textures very much. It just kind of gets boring to me. But the moment that you contour it, it does these wild things with the light. I freaking love the way that looks, and that is so freaking cool. And it also provides you with the kind of monochrome black and white quality that you would get from that. Well, basically you'll get from carbon fiber, but that you don't get if you get one of the fat carbons, because this was also offered in this. Oof, that's the other thing. This looks amazing. This is the copper camo version of fat carbon, and I don't love the camo series from them. It's in the same lineup as like the Arctic Storm and stuff like that. But anyway, the versions, it's just not my favorite because of the way that the texturing works and everything like that. But once you contour it, it again looks amazing and looks less like camouflage to me and more like some kind of really cool topo thing. Oh, I love the way that came out. This also came in a blue and then also in OD green micarta. Okay, let's open these up. Okay, that was delightful. Oh, yeah, that is a very good thwack. Okay, so how does this fit in my hand? Already, I am enjoying this so much more than I did the Osprey. We'll talk all about why, but this feels so nice in my hand. Okay, yeah, I am absolutely loving this. How does this close? It's like stiff. Yeah, that's definitely stiff. So this is the kind of knife that has a decent amount of lock bar pressure is what it feels like. Like this is pretty firm to push over. And so, okay, so what even is this? This is it's one of those lockup designs that doesn't quite meet any category because this is, for all intents and purposes, a frame lock with an inlay, which makes it a frame lock, but also makes it pretty darn similar to a bolster lock. But the difference is that the bolster lock would expand this entire way. The inlay would become an overlay and right there. And so this is one of those weird hybrids that's doing something that not a lot of other people do, but it's going to have the same kind of effect of a bolster lock where you are removing material from the lock bar itself, which is going to make it more flexible. But because it's not fully removed like that, like you would find in a bolster lock, you have the full thickness of the lock bar there. And this is a reasonably thick knife. We'll talk about that in just a second. And so this is actually pretty stiff. So this is a lot of pressure right here. And as a result, this is smooth to close, but there's just force the entire way. So it closes easily if you're trying to close it. Yeah, definitely very easy, especially easier when you're not under a... That one's actually a little bit smoother, both like literally a little bit less friction feeling and also just a little bit easier to close. I'm guessing that this is just a little bit lighter. Yep, I think that's what's going on here. What that means for me is that I probably want to tune the lock bar on mine, and this is probably exactly where Stefan wants his. Yeah, I just like that a little bit better. That feels a little bit better. It could also be that the pivot on this is just slightly tight because this is a Reate-made knife, and a Reate-made knives almost always come a little bit tight in the pivot for me. Okay, let's start talking about what we got going on here. This is a... Let me look this up real quick because I don't actually remember. Yeah, this is a 3.34-inch blade, which means it's over my normal limit, but not very far over my limit. And that's when I say limit, I say like my comfort zone, what I'm typically used to. But I think that when knives are low down tips and just kind of easy to put into a choked up pinch grip, then I like longer blades just fine. I can go all the way up to 3.5 and feel perfectly comfortable. I normally find myself topping out around 3.25, but I think this is going to be perfect. Let me see how this fits in a pinch grip. Yes! Okay, one of the reasons why I really wanted this is because I thought it would do exactly what it's doing right here. Look at how this is fitting into my hand. So this is subtly curved back here and comes to this back little notch. Then there is this flat part right here with a harpoon tip. And then there's this grip right here on the thumb. And so what this does is this curves into your hand here. Your finger plants right here, and then your thumb sits on this grip. Your fingers are able to then sit onto this spot right there as the kind of an anchoring point. And this feels so exceptionally locked in. This is exactly how harpoon pinch grip ergos are supposed to feel. This is spectacular at that. And as a result, because I feel like I'm in such good control in this position, the fact that this is sticking out further down here because of the longer blade is totally fine. I feel like I would be able to use this tip perfectly. Oof. Okay. So what do we actually got on? Like I said, this is a 3.34 inch blade. And so that means it's going to be like 3 3/8. This is blade stock wise. I don't think they list it. My gut says this is probably 1.375. I could measure it. Let me do it. Let me just do that real quick. I was off. 1.275. So just under 1.3 inches on that. And it has this delightful, tall, belt satin, Reate infamous. I guess infamous has a kind of a negative connotation. They're extremely famous. Delightful, beautiful belt satin there. And it's a hollow grind that is nice and deep. Oof. So even though this isn't the thinnest blade stock, it's actually not bad at all for an EDC knife. This is very, very thin down here at the bottom. What does this look like it's coming to? It looks quite thin behind the edge. I'm going to peg that as somewhere between 16 and 18 thousandths behind the edge, just my eye calipers. And you can see that it comes all the way out here to the tip. But this tip is not dainty. The angle that they've done here on this means that this hollow grind, like you can see that because this curves up into the hollow grind, we're actually far up the grind. Like this is the part that's super thin down here, and that ends is basically where the blade doesn't exist anymore. And so this tip is actually up here in the slightly thicker part. And so it's not surprising at all to see that there is a good amount of meat up here behind that tip. Get that to focus. And so this is actually not a dainty tip, despite how thin it is on here. And that's going to make this really cool for a couple of different kinds of cutting. What that means is that you're going to be able to enter materials really easily down here. But you're going to be able to put real force up here and not worry about bending it. Sometimes, if they had kept this all the way down at the bottom, made it the same thinness as this would be a pretty fragile tip, and you'd be worried about pushing any kind of lateral pressure as you're pushing down in, because you might bend it to the side, and I don't think we're going to have that at all. This is a nice, robust tip. One thing, so they put a swedge right up here, and that is, I think they've done a really nice job with that swedge, because it's meant largely be aesthetic. It's not really doing a whole lot when it comes to thinning out the blade. It is thinning out the blade some, because you can see that this wedge is dropping down below the top of this grind path. And so this is definitely coming down into that hollow grind, and it's going to thin it out. But it's not that far down, and this part of the hollow grind up here is the thickest part, and so it's not going to make that huge of a difference. What I love about it is that it's actually still thick on top. This is something that I always encourage people to do if they're going to put a swedge on the top of a utility cutting knife, like with a low down tip, because what you want, the swedge, you want it to, like, mostly for aesthetics. You want to be able to see that swedge at the top, but you don't want the top part here to be so thin that it's unpleasant to hold. And so if I come and choke up all the way onto the blade and put my finger all the way up to this tip, this is actually, by the way, still very, very comfortable. And the bigger thing is this is thick enough up here that doesn't hurt at all. I can put my finger all the way to the tip, push a lot of force down, and that feels fantastic. See, that's actually something that I didn't like about this Osprey. You can see that the swedge on here comes to a very fine point, and it gives the illusion that this is a very thin tip, but you can see it's not actually a very thin tip. That's a very aggressive swedge. This is the full thickness right here, and it's almost the full thickness all the way down. Like, the tip's there, but the actual width of this is all the way back here where my fingers are. So the result is that if you choke up on this and you push down right here, you're pushing on this very thin spot. And this is not a utility cutting knife, like this, not with a low down tip, but you can do this, and it just doesn't feel anywhere as nice as it could to push on that end. And this with it widening back out like that, that feels perfect. I love that. And this is a knife I wanted to feel good in a pinch grip, and boy, does it ever. So another thing that I didn't love about this knife is that aesthetically it feels busy as hell to me. This feels like so many different splotches of texture all kind of mashed together, to the point where this ends up feeling to me, to my eye, like a patchwork quilt. And I apologize if that's like a rude way of saying this, but it just looks too much. Like you've got a color texture here, a texture there that gives kind of a darkening effect. And this is like it's G10, so it's got that kind of ribbed kind of look to it. And then this is a different microdot texture. This is a diamond. And then you've got all of these screws back here. These screws are keeping that on. And then up in the front, you've got, the circle there and the thing sticking out there. And then you've got this slot here. And then you've got hand satin on the top, and then and then belt satin down here. So these are very different colors, and the way the lines are all going different ways. And then there's another line there. And so this is just like all of these patches of different texture and color together, and it just feels very busy to me. And the texture itself actually does a fantastic job of giving you grip, and so I love that there's texture up here. But so the thing, if I was to clean this knife up some and just kind of like tone it down, I would keep this texture and drop this. And I would probably, since it's not super easy to get into this fuller, you can, but it's like you kind of have to shove your finger down in there, and so it's easy to miss it. I would probably even argue to drop this fuller. Either that or make the fuller a little bit easier to access and drop the flipper. Over here, we've fixed these problems. And now, yeah, there's still a lot of those same elements. We've got an inlay that has a texture to it. We've got a different texture here, and we've got the same kind of belt satin here and, hand satin there and belt satin here. But everything about this is just implemented differently. So for one, there is no hardware holding this inlay in. Over here, we've got the big screws. Over here, we've got all of these screws, including this little patch down here to make this reversible. Yeah, we are losing reversibility, and we do have screws on the back, but this front is so incredibly clean because these screws go all the way through. Over here, we've got screws on both sides. Here, we've got just the two, and they go into empty spots over here. So this just looks so much cleaner. Then, this texture here is fundamentally different than this texture. Like this is a kind of grid-like texture, but it is swirly enough because of the contouring. And then this is lines. And so those like complement each other instead of like power clashing with each other. And this being flat and texture and like small dot texture there and small dot texture there, but not the same one. This feels like it's clashing. This feels like it's flowing. Second, this is it's a simulated inlay here where it doesn't extend all the way up to the edge, in which it continues that kind of feeling of being like a patch that's sewed on. This continues all the way up to the edges and makes it feel like this feels like a true kind of bolster effect, like a pseudo bolster. And it just, everything about the aesthetics of this handle, I think, is just so much cleaner. And but it's not just better. I think it's exceptional. Like, I want to be very clear about that. I'm not just saying it's better than something that I said I didn't really like very much. This is a very, very well-designed handle. And then the blade up here, because we don't have that fuller. So over here, we had the fuller and we had the late branding right there. And over here, the branding has replaced where the fuller is. And the end result of this is that the blade itself just feels a heck of a lot cleaner. Overall, I think this knife has amazing lines to it. And I think that it just is so much more fluid. The other thing I want to point out is this clip. Now, over here, this clip is just this straight bar, and it doesn't have any texture. And yes, the handles themselves are just these flat slabs. They're excellently contoured on the side. Reate does an amazing job of these kind of radiused edges that they can do, but this clip just feels like it's there. It doesn't really line up with any angles. It doesn't really do anything design-wise. I do love that it is using one of these back screws. Like it's not, there's not an additional screw. I hate when there's a screw at the very back and then the clip right in front of it. So I'm glad they did that. And it does kind of hide one of these, but otherwise I think this clip is just kind of an afterthought. And you come over here and this is a worlds apart, totally different story. This clip is fixing everything that clip does wrong. It is flowing with the line. It is a curved clip that emulates and mirrors the curves you see elsewhere. It has milling in it that flows into and is a continuation of this up here. And you can see that the line, you see how this isn't just, this is actually like coming to a little kind of crescendo, little tips right there. And that is perfectly lined up with and flowing into these. This clip fits into the design and flow of the knife beautifully. Whereas this clip feels like an afterthought. The one thing I'll say that I like that this clip does better is look how far it comes back to the end of the knife. And this could come back further and just doesn't. Now, if it were to come back further, I would want them to meaningfully contour this back part. As is, because of the fact that it's not all the way at the end, it already has this kind of natural built-in ramp. And so when I was holding it a moment ago, yeah. A knife, a clip like this, because it's upset just slightly, not at the very back, means that there is this spot for your hand to kind of curl down around it. Whereas on this clip, because it is this corner right at the back, it's definitely a lot. Yeah, you feel that a lot more because the entire back part of this, all of the force of the back of the knife when you squeeze in is pushing onto that corner. Over here, it's being split up between these two spots and kind of that pressure is being evened out. And so this is just a more comfortable clip. Now, as far as tension, that is nice spring tension like that. How was this one? Pretty much the same. Wow. Yeah, everything about this knife is just meaningfully cleaner. Next thing up. Now, I have said many times on this channel that when a lanyard hole is was implemented by having the backspacer stick out further than the rest of the handle, that's one of my cardinal sins because it puts all of the force at the back of the knife on a narrower spot. But this is done so subtly, like this is such a small amount of additional sticking out that this is effectively flush. Like if you push on this, your skin is going to immediately feel these two sides. And so it's not actually doing that thing. I say that it's a problem because it puts all of the force on a narrower spot, but that's not actually the case with this because this is such a subtle point that you are distributing your force across all of these. And they've done a nice job of keeping these rounded. You can see there's wonderful little chamfers here. So these are not sharp corners. And so at the end of the day, I don't think you should ever design a thing like this because you are introducing corners that don't need to exist, and you are doing that other thing that I just mentioned about putting on the force there. But if you're going to do it, this version is a very, very well done version of this. Now this jimping right here in the backspacer, before I go transition to that, that's another thing that I didn't like about this, is because this lanyard hole, this hole like mirrors these other circles, but this is like a black hole and these are like shiny little holes. And so it just is another thing that feels like another disparate texture. And it also gives you that kind of afterthought effect where it's just a hole punched all the way through your knife. This feels a heck of a lot more integrated, designed and everything like that. And the shapes here are they're just neater. Now, coming up to this thing, when a backspacer has traction like this, sometimes if depending on how it's implemented, it can just be for show. But for the most part, what that's doing is actually giving you traction in your hand. Especially if a handle is curving down like this, then when you're holding it in your hand in a pinch grip, your hand is making contact with that spot. And it's subtle-ish, but especially if you're pushing and squeezing like this, it really does add traction on a knife. Now, over here, we had a different kind of jimping. It's a little bit shallower, and so this one isn't as grippy. This one is pretty grippy. I actually think this works pretty darn well. Partly what's going on is that it's just deeper, and a big part of what's going on is that it's more spread out. And so that means that when you push into this at all, your finger or your hand or whatever is able to grip, just kind of sink down into that a little bit more, but it's not so deep that it hurts in any way. This is very, very well done. My one stylistic, if I were to complain, thing is that because they did go out of their way to emulate this same kind of hatched look thing here, almost chevron-esque, I think it would be really fun if they had done that here too and made these little tiny chevrons rather than a perfectly straight lines. But that said, they did the spacing on this and the depth of this does match this very, very well. I don't know if it's exactly the same. It might be exactly the same, or it might be slightly more spaced out, but it does mirror this very, very well. And so I think, again, this knife has such a better aesthetic tie-in. Everything about this just feels more thought out and more refined. What else do I want to talk about? The handle thickness here. This is interesting because this knife is 0.46 inches, 0.462, I think they listed as. And one thing that's going on with this knife, everything about this knife. Okay. So you know how sometimes makers will release a version of their knife at one size, and then they'll release a small version, like a mini version. And sometimes sometimes they'll literally just scale the knife down. They'll just shrink all the dimensions by a little bit. And in other times, they'll shrink the fundamental dimensions down, but then tweak everything to make it still kind of work. And it'll be a novel knife, but just at a smaller size. Something about this is not the shrunken down, just scaled down version of a larger knife. It's just not. I don't know his customs lineups that well, so maybe there is a larger version of this effectively exact same knife in his customs, but there isn't like a production version. But something about this knife, every time I look at it and every time I hold it, feels like a just scaled down version of a larger knife. Something about it. The height here compared to the thickness here compared to the length, everything about this, it just feels like a smaller version of a bigger knife. And then when I hold it in my hand, yeah, it just consistently feels slightly wrong to me in that way. Like it feels like it should be a little bit taller, or that it should be maybe a little bit thinner for the height, or that it should be something. It just feels slightly wrong. I don't get that feeling at all with this. This feels like it's almost like a sixth sense that I'm describing, because it's just like a gut feeling when you pick it up and when you look at it. This, I don't get that at all. This feels exactly like how I would expect it to be, and it feels really fantastic in my hand. I said that this, part of what's going on here is that like the height here versus the thickness here is doing something kind of weird in my brain, but this is 0.46 inches. This is 0.505, and that means that for a thin knife in this height dimension is actually reasonably thick. And for a EDC knife in general, these days, it's actually reasonably thick. Like anything over half an inch is starting to become a little bit thick. It's not thick, but it's certainly not the thinner, slimmer knives that we've kind of become more accustomed to. But this feels so freaking good in my hand. And part of what's going on here, like, is that's the maximum thickness, but this is contoured this whole way. Like this entire thing is a flowing contour. And the end result is that the actual peak is right up here at the top. It's not dead centered. And so this knife still has like a really good, clear sense of indexing. I can tell when I'm on this part versus when I'm curling up onto this part. I think that this here, I might be able to show that contour even better up here. Yeah, there we go. So this is flowing curved up, reaching an apex and flowing curved down. And I think it's beautifully done, and it really does feel fantastic in my hand. Oof, yeah, that's really, really nice. Now, something that I'm curious about. Okay, so what I'm trying to do there is flick this knife, and there's barely any exposed right there. And so the thing is I was on a pass-around group to check out one of these that Lefty EDC was putting together. He got it in from Eric himself, I believe, and was passing around to a bunch of channels. And I was on that list, but since I knew I was going to get 2 of these in, I took myself off. The version that he had, Kev was able to flick this. Ooh, I kind of got close on that. Ooh, I'm getting closer. So the fact that I'm getting closer on this one, which I said was just a little bit smoother, and the fact that I wasn't able to do on this one was just a little bit tighter, I think it might be that the one that he had was just tuned differently, and I'm probably just not going to be able to flick this one. You would be able to flick this better if this grind came up higher and you were able to actually flick off of the exposed grind. Let me see, can I get my finger in here? Nope. The fact that I'm able to pull this, ooh, hey, I did that, okay. Okay, so this is the kind of thing where you can technically do it when it's tuned like this one, which is just a lighter. And so maybe I'll be able to tune this one to work, but I don't think that you should buy this expecting it to be a flicking knife. I think you should buy this expecting it to be a flipper tab knife. Now let's look at that flipper tab, because he is doing something still that bugs me. One of the reasons that I thought this knife was kind of odd is that this flipper tab, to me, doesn't make sense with where the jimping is. This flipper tab has a flat portion at the top. And when there's a flat portion of the knife, it feels like maybe you'll be able to push button, like pushing on that. But you can see that that's pushing directly into the pivot. And so you clearly can't just push down on this. You're supposed to put your finger on this front part, and you can push down on that. You can do that as a more push buttony, or you can hook this and pull back and do more light switchy. But look where he put the jimping. Now, this isn't the kind of jimping that you can just put your finger here and pull back. It's not going to catch you. And so the jimping up here doesn't make sense. Where you'd want jimping is not there, but right there. You'd want jimping to catch your finger there because you're going to have to kind of pull back. And right now, this is slick. And so to me, this is a flipper tab that just doesn't really make sense. You can use it, but I end up finding that I'm putting a lot of my force, because of the fact there's no jimping here, I have to push into it rather than being able to pull back more. And so I end up finding that I'm putting a lot of force right onto these corners. And so this is a functional flipper tab, but just not super well designed. And if we come over here, we can see that it is a very similar flipper tab, but there is an important difference. He's still doing that same odd, I think, incorrect placement of putting jimping on top of the flipper tab and not on the front. But if you look at the difference here, you see how this one is just kind of sloping back, and you see how this one is sloping up just slightly more. It's hard to get them to focus on both at the same time. The end result of this is that it's easier to feel like you're hooked on the front of this. The other one, you're pushing on something that's leaning back against you, so it's easy to slide off this. This is just vertical enough that that is a lot easier kind of plant on. And so this, I think it's just a meaningfully better flipper tab. It's so subtly different, but meaningfully better. Now, why would you ever put jimping right there? Sometimes people put jimping right there if they expect you to wrap up around it in this kind of grip, because then it's like in use grip jimping. But no, you're never going to do this. This knife has a finger choil right above that. This is my first time actually trying to use it, and that feels great. Ooh, yeah, no, that actually works really, really well. I do have medium glove size hands and slightly thin hands. So like I don't have like long bony fingers, but I don't have very thick fingers. And so sometimes finger choils work better for me than they do for the average person. But this is long enough, extending all the way down here on this top part here, that this, I think, even if you have much thicker fingers than me, yeah, that still works very, very well. For me and my fingers, this fits perfectly. You can see another important detail is that this is cut off at an angle right here going forward, which means that even if you are kind of bigger fingered and pushing up into that, it's not a tiny little sharp corner back here that's going to give you a puncture wound. So in this grip, feels fantastic, and choked up, ooh, that feels fantastic. And that choked up means that I can actually put my thumb right at the top of this harpoon. And so if I want to push through something and use just that front part, that will actually give me a lot of leverage. Now, the other thing about this is you can see that the full thickness of the blade is running all the way up through here. And so that means that this is a very comfortable spot to push your finger on. There's nice little chamfers on the edge. You'll find that almost every Reate knife, I don't know if designers even have to tell them to do this, because every Reate knife I've ever seen has these wonderful little chamfers along the side of all these little corners that make them not sharp. So as a result, this feels very, very good to push into. And sometimes when finger choils extend up into the blade, it means that there's parts going to be here is going to be sharp. But you can see this is actually still quite nice. Now, what does that mean for the sharpening choil? That's tough to say. It's kind of hard to see on this knife where exactly the plunge grind is ending. It seems like it's a pretty fluid transition and it's ending right about maybe there, which means that you have all of this to sharpen. Now, if you look at how high that is vertically, it's actually not that high, but it's about that much. And that's about as much as you're going to get on a lot of knives. It also would not be hard to extend this choil upward and kind of make this line a bit flatter and make that come down more. It would change the ergonomics, I think, some, but you're not really pushing up in that direction anyway. And so if you do need to grind a new sharpening choil in, I think it would work just well. I brought out another knife that I wanted to show because I think one of the reasons why I find this, one of the things that this reminds me of, it's definitely very different, but just overall, I think this fits into the same kind of category for me as this. This is my Brad Southard Mini Tolk, and this is a long, this one's thinner, but it's a long, kind of short in this dimension knife with a like very dramatic flows, and it's a curve here for you to be able to put your finger into. And these clearly are differently shaped, like no question about it. But I think that they share a common kind of design language that makes them both appeal to me very, very strongly. Both of them just have really nice balanced curves to them. Both of them feel spectacular in a pinch grip with a low down tip for you to use in utility cuts. The big difference between these functionality-wise is that this one has, even thicker blade stock, and it has just a flat grind. And so the problem with this is that it's never been the sliciest knife. This is a used one that I bought on secondary market, and whoever owned it before me had laid back this bevel angle here to be something that would be better for slicing. But this is still just not the sliciest knife. Whereas this thinner blade stock and hollow grind is going to mean that for a lot of kinds of cutting, this is going to be a much, much slicier knife. Remember that hollow grinds aren't the best for every kind of slicing. If you're cutting something that is very, very dense and won't splay to the side easily, something like double-walled cardboard or very high-density cardboard, or especially something like styrofoam, hollow grinds don't work well because they force all of that splaying of the material to happen at the very top of the grind all at once. Flat grinds that do that evenly as you go up the blade just work better for that kind of stuff. But for things that are easy to flay, so if you are regular cardboard that will splay easily, or if you're cutting through anything at all that is soft or malleable, hollow grinds work spectacularly for that. And so for the kind of cutting that I do, where I'm usually using the edge more than the entire length, cutting on surfaces, cutting with the tip, cutting through cardboard in this dimension instead of this dimension, this kind of knife is just going to be such a better cutter for me. And so, yeah, by the way, me comparing this to this knife is a just absolutely enormous compliment, because this is, I think, one of my favorite knives of all time, and this is a brand new to me item. So that's high praise for me. What else would I want to talk about on this? Part of me kind of regrets not getting this colorway. I'm not much of a copper person, but this is so gorgeous. I love the way this came out so much. But honestly, this is an exceptionally mean knife. I'm really pleased with how this turned out, because honestly, I just walked away from this one not really liking the experience all that much. It does a lot of things really well, but it does enough things that are either, I think kind of objectively could be better, or just aren't me, that I walked away not really liking this. Right now, I'm walking away absolutely loving this, and that is just a way, way better feeling. Is there anything else that I actually want to talk about on this? That is such a good flick. I don't know. I think that's where I'm going to leave this. This is definitely a keeper for me. I am very pleased with how this turned out. I will lighten this lock bar to make it more similar to how this one's behaving, because this one, I think the tuning on this, the flick is a little bit less hard, but it's still super duper snappy, and the close is just a little bit easier. And so this is, I think, kind of perfect, and I'm going to make that one work the same way. Anyway, I love this, Eric. Really, really well done. I think you just absolutely nailed this knife. I think I might actually get to meet you soon. There is a custom knife show happening in Portland in a couple of weeks, and I'm pretty sure you're going. So hopefully I get to meet you then. I hear you're a really nice guy, so that'd be cool to talk to you. The last thing I want to say is at the time that I'm filming this, these are still in stock. Now, I don't know how long they'll stay in stock, and I don't know how long it'll take me to put this video up, but I got both of these were gotten in the pre-order, which you did save, I think, $30 if you got in the pre-order. You did it as like a split pay too and everything like that. So they are a little bit more expensive. Right now, this version is sitting at $360 and this version is sitting at $350. And my opinion, based on the materials, the construction, the way this is moving, what I know about Reate's build quality and everything, I think that is 100% worth the price. I think this is absolutely worth every single penny. And so if this appeals to you and you go and it's still in stock, I think you're gonna like this knife. Okay, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.